Hello, everybody. This is the Two Pointers Podcast, a podcast where two childhood best friends, myself, Trevor, and my co host, Josh, talk all things hoops. We'll analyze and debate news and what's happening in the world of basketball today. Today's episode of the Two Pointers Podcast is sponsored by Crack Technician Services. This awesome up-and-coming tech repair company can be your go-to for any tech repair service. From screen repair to battery replacement to speakers and so much more, they can fix it all. It is run by my good friend, Mr. Jonathan Hardy. You can inquire about a service by sending a message on Instagram at cracked_technician_services or by way of email, crackedtechnicianservices@gmail.com. Again, that's cracked_technician services on Instagram and crackedtechnicianservices@gmail.com. Two Pointers Podcast listeners get an exclusive discount code. You can use TPP at checkout for 10% off your first service. Now on to today's episode.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. Thank you for tuning in again this week. This week, we're going to be covering some of the top stories from around the NBA, including James Harden making a big splash in Brooklyn with his debut, the impending return of Kyrie Irving. We're going to be looking at just how good is the Milwaukee Bucks offense. We'll go over the new protocols from the NBA Board of Governors meeting on health and safety, and we will kind of wrap up where we're at 1 month into the NBA season. So, James Harden, as you know, was traded Wednesday evening of last week, and so Harden came and made his Brooklyn debut this weekend in the game between the Nets and the Orlando Magic. Harden had probably his best game of the season so far, finishing with 32 points, 12 rebounds, and 14 assists, which is his first triple-double of the year with the Nets. And Kevin Durant also played exceptionally well with his new teammate, scoring 42 points on 16 of 28 shooting. Trevor, what do you think of the Harden debut in Brooklyn?
First of all, obviously he was basically on cruise control coming out when he was still in Houston. He was basically coming out in cruise control and looked like he shed about 30 pounds of fat all of a sudden. Like as soon as he gets to Brooklyn, he sheds his fat and he looks happy and he's ready to go. He looks like he's a top 10 player like he always has. I don't have nothing crazy other than obviously it was exciting because you knew he was excited. That was the main thing that we saw as all the stuff started happening with the physicals and checking up on getting those players ready for their new teams. He was super ecstatic, super ready to get in there and play for a team he was happy to play for. Obviously, it's awesome to see he's the first 30-point triple-double for a team debut. That was awesome, for the Nets and for Harden. That team's scary, man. And they don't even have their point guard yet, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. They 32, 14, and 12 looks like something he's been doing forever. Like I said, he's a top 10 player, and he's going to continue to be a top 10 player. I think it really does help Durant's MVP case. 44 points on basically really, really high efficient shooting from the field. He's going to be awesome. I think his MVP odds are going to keep getting better. Obviously, he's got to play and he's got to make sure he doesn't get hurt. But Harden, I think, has already missed enough games / had the COVID issues as well as the multiple just cruise control type games. I think he was only averaging just over 20 points a game as he was leaving Houston. So I don't think he's in the running for MVP anymore, but that team's going to look really good, and they're going to be hard to stop in the East. They beat a good Magic team as well, 122 to 115. The Magic obviously missing Markelle Fultz, but they're a good defensive team. Coach Clifford's got him playing really good defense, and obviously having a new point guard with Cole Anthony guarding basically whoever was playing point guard for the Nets that night. I think Harden played some point guard I saw in the second and third quarters, but they looked really good, and that team, like I said, it's going to be really hard to beat.
Yeah, I think it's terrifying that you use the phrase Harden on cruise control with averaging 20-something points per game for a player to – and I mean, I think it's accurate as well. Like, he is just one of the best scorers we've seen in a long time, and only averaging in that 20-some area points per game is kind of like it seems like he's on cruise control, or he's not making it to the free throw line as much as he normally does, which is a large portion where he gets his points, where he scored 13 this weekend for Brooklyn. But yeah, if you're in the East, I'd be pretty worried right now because it looks like now, obviously, we've only seen one game, but Harden and Durant are playing very well together, which I don't feel like it's too big of a shock. They had been teammates before. They have chemistry working together, Kevin Durant isn't as ball dominant a player as some other players are, and it allows the opportunity for Harden to kind of work as that primary combo guard, which will change, I think, obviously a little bit when Kyrie Irving makes his return. But if you're in the Eastern Conference, you should have been worried about Brooklyn before, and now you have a much bigger reason to be worried about Brooklyn.
I think I wanted to follow up on from our emergency, sirens going off podcast that first ever one we've ever done like that. When he gets traded, we obviously sat down that evening and talked. We shouldn't have been shocked it was the Nets. We knew it was going to be the Sixers, the Nets, and maybe the Heat for a long time. He had a short list, and very rare does that short list get taken care of in the sense that they actually go somewhere. Like I know Kawhi was kind of the one weird one where they made sure he ended up somewhere that wasn't, somewhere he's going to stay forever. But Harden was saying for months, and him and KD have been conspiring this for a while. They've been friends on Team USA. That's how the Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and DeAndre Jordan situation happened this last offseason. But they look like they're just best friends again. Like obviously they've been best friends for a long time, but just seeing them on the court together, that chemistry is going to be something they continue to build. It's only going to get better. One thing I will say is a quote from Harden is hopefully that you can tell by my smile and my play that I'm just ready for this opportunity and I'm excited to move forward. So that should show you how that cruise control mentality. He went from ready to get the heck out of town to he's going to hopefully lead them to at least the Eastern Conference finals berth, and you would hope for the draft capital that the team gave up. You really hope he's a player for the long haul for them.
Yeah, it's looking like it's a good move for Brooklyn. And I think it was kind of, like you said, looking back at our past podcast where we addressed the Harden trade on Wednesday. If Brooklyn wins a championship, which it looks like they've got all the tools. Now putting it together is always a different thing in sports. It's never a guarantee. If they win a championship or championships, giving up the draft capital is worth it. That's the goal of this league. You want to win it all. There's no point in kind of like stocking draft capital for the future that could be used to go win a title now if you're never going to win a championship. So if Brooklyn can exploit the opportunities they've kind of arranged for themselves here, then I think it's a good deal for them. On kind of a side note point with what you mentioned about the Harden and Durant on Team USA, obviously there was experience together from time in Oklahoma City at the beginning of their careers. But also I think it's interesting. It seems like we've seen a lot of these teams kind of build together from experiences guys have had in Team USA. We were told a lot that a big reason that Kevin Durant found his way to Golden State was based on his friendship he formed with Stephen Curry when they were playing in the FIBA World Cup back in, I want to say 2014. So I think it's interesting, especially going into this summer where we've got the 2021 Olympics, and we've had a lot of these big stars say they want to come play for Team USA after the less than stellar performance at the most recent FIBA World Cup in 2018. I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of relationships might form to influence the next several years in the NBA.
Yeah, the USA team as well as like the FIBA World Cup stuff, it's just a big conglomerate of not recruiting. Obviously, this isn't college, but it's a big just clustered mess of people doing the wrong things and saying the wrong things when they're not supposed to. Obviously, players can talk all they want. Tampering. Thank you. I couldn't even think of the word. Long day. But it's just a big tampering ground, and we shouldn't be shocked by it, but that's how most of these guys build their relationship, and they know how the business works. They're not dumb. These players know this is the most player-driven league. We had a debate in our group chat a few days ago about the NFL and the NBA, and I made it very clear my opinion of like it's a player-driven league. Adam Silver is a players commissioner. Obviously, legally, you got to do all the things within the parameters you're allowed to do, but these guys are best friends. It's very fraternized. It's just part of the process. And that brings me to my next point of their third and biggest piece, I think, right now moving forward, because Harden and KD can play together. It's how Kyrie Irving implements into the system there, because Kyrie and KD have been friends for a long time. As of this moment, Kyrie is going to be forfeiting his salary for the multiple games, or 2 games specifically, that may be increased. But as of notes on Monday here, the 18th that we're recording, he's going to be forfeiting $816,895 of his 2 games there, as well as a $50,000 fine for violating the COVID safety protocols. This comes from that investigation for the NBA. We thought it was going to be something that Kyrie was going to be able to come back and he chooses when he comes back, but as something as serious as this is, the way the league's taking him, which we'll get to the COVID stuff later this episode, they're taking it a lot more seriously. According to GM Sean Marks, Kyrie is, quote, looking forward to being back, end quote. What does Irving's coming back look like to you, and how does that happen smoothly after the Harden edition?
Well, if my team just brought in a player like James Harden, I'd be looking forward to coming back too. It would make my job a whole lot easier on the court. Yeah, I think if Kyrie's on his way back, which it seems like he is, he's back in the quarantine, he is ready to return to play for Brooklyn, then they're in a really good spot now. I think a lot of people will question the ability of Irving to play on the court at the same time as Harden. And I would kind of push back on that, quite a bit, because we heard the same things last year when Russell Westbrook made his way to Houston, that two ball-dominant players couldn't coexist in offense. And it seemed like really for Westbrook and Harden that both of their numbers improved during their time in Houston playing together. James Harden is a guy who gets a lot of assists, passes the ball a lot, as we saw pulled off a triple-double in his first game playing with Durant. They're two players who were just exceptional on the offensive side of the ball. And adding more good players on the offensive side of the ball, especially when ball movement, at least from Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving's side, is going to be a big impact. I don't see how that's going to be a detriment to Brooklyn's offense. And then there's also the options that Brooklyn can have to kind of stagger their play, since they are both good at kind of running the point guard spot. Even though Harden is a shooting guard, he plays a large portion of combo guard and led the point a great number of times in Houston. They have the ability to kind of stagger both guys, and it's going to be like a really good opportunity for Brooklyn to be able to have one of those two guys on the court at really any time in a game.
To follow up on your point, Harden's going to be happier. We already mentioned that. Harden's going to be happier to play in an offense that he feels more comfortable in, where he's not having to be the guy. He's been saying to Houston for many years now that that's why they brought in Chris Paul. That's why they traded for Russell Westbrook. That's why they brought in these role players that could be really helpful. Robert Covington prior to him leaving. But he's feel like he wanted the weight lifted off his shoulder for so many years now. And he is an unselfish team player, whether we want to admit that or not. He really is at the end of the day. He's not as ball dominant as he's been given the discredit for while his time in Houston. Obviously for Kyrie's case, like, he's going to come back. He's a ball dominant guard. Don't get me wrong, but it's similar to when you said, like, brought up the Westbrook point. We said the same thing about Chris Paul, about being, about two ball dominant guys can't work together. And I made the joke on the emergency pod that who's going to beat this team? The ball's gonna. I was like, obviously I retract some of that statement. They look good. They're going to be good, but they've got to make sure their chemistry is good on the court as well as off the court. That much star power. There's been in cases where, not just in the NBA, but just in sports in general, where that much star power can really be a problem. I don't think it's going to be in their case. I think they're going to be scary to beat, but we'll get to, in a moment here, we'll get to our other team that I think is going to give them a run for their money. And it's going to be a really competitive East this year, barring the fact that there's some teams like Toronto and Miami that are not looking great.
Okay, on our next point that we have today, we're going to look into the Milwaukee Bucks, the team that Trevor was alluding to as a team to give Brooklyn a run for their money, and coincidentally is playing Brooklyn tonight. So, little preview there probably of the Eastern Conference Finals, and we will probably talk about that game on our next podcast next week, which we obviously can't now because the game is not concluded yet. So currently the Milwaukee Bucks, who I think was mentioned by Trevor in our last podcast, for both of us had kind of become an afterthought, which I think shows very obviously how a lot of our takes are just shots in the dark here, because the Milwaukee Bucks are currently 9-4 in first place of the Eastern Conference and have the second best offense in the NBA. They are currently at the moment averaging 120.2 points per game. That comes in second in overall scoring, barely behind the Washington Wizards, which is just a weird team to be the one that's leading the NBA in total offense, but it's a different point for a different day. The Milwaukee Bucks have just really been on a roll recently. They're also playing good defense, only allowing 109.5 points per game from their opponents. And to see a team like Milwaukee, who, they made a concerted effort in their bringing in of Drew Holiday in the offseason to kind of up the ante on the offensive side of the ball. And for a team that also has Giannis Antetokounmpo being the reigning defensive player of the year, to have such a powerful offense is really an imposing threat in the East, and definitely not a team that are going to be an afterthought. However, I realize now that's making these points, we're kind of just looping back around to what both of us thought kind of from the beginning of the season in the Eastern Conference, that it would probably come down to Milwaukee and Brooklyn.
Yeah, Milwaukee's been nothing short of, they're normally a stellar defense. I will say they should be, to be completely clear, in my opinion, they should be number one in offensive scoring. The only reason they're not is because of the Washington Bradley Beals. That's the only reason they're not. Obviously, he's averaging something crazy like 35 points a game, and Westbrook's been hurt for a lot of that time. But the Bucks should be the number one offense in the NBA, and they are darn near close. A couple other things to make note of. Not only are they number one or number two in points per game, they're also second in total offensive rating, that's an analytical stat that a lot of people who are big analytical driven in this league, they always look to, and they're always trying to make their title defenses based on offensive defensive rating. It's a really big deal. They're also passing the ball really well. They're fifth in total assists with 341. We've been talking multiple times about Nikola Jokic finishing in the top 5 in total assists and assists per game. And believe it or not, just keep thinking here, like, I was looking at the assist leaders. They're not even in the top 5. The Nuggets are, just as a weird little blip there from our previous points, like you mentioned about shots in the dark. They're fourth in field goals made in total. I think they'll probably finish in the top 3, if not number 1 in total field goals, because Giannis obviously isn't shooting the ball particularly well from 3. But and then my key point and what I think is so important for their development this year, and obviously they had the most threes in an NBA game not too long ago. But they're first in three-pointers made. They're tied for first with Portland with 212. So that number, I think, continues to go up with guys like Pat Connaughton and Dante DiVincenzo is who I was trying to say, as well as Jordan Noir, the guy from Louisville that they drafted, as well as just their pieces around him like Drew Holiday and Brook Lopez. They're going to continue to shoot the ball really well, and Giannis is going to continue to make a possible 3-time MVP case. I don't think it happens, but
Giannis is going to continue to Giannis. That's what's going to happen.
Correct. He's going to be their guy. I think they look really good. Like I said, they're nothing short of a stellar defensive team, but they're tied for first in 3-pointers attempted outside of 25 to 29 feet, which is that they're going to continue to chuck them, and they're just going to keep going in until I don't see that falling off anytime soon.
I wanted to go back to a point. To be clear, when I said that Nikola Jokic would finish in the top 5 assists, I meant specifically Nikola Jokic would finish in the top 5 assists. I made no inclinations about the assist prowess of the Denver Nuggets as a whole team. And I think I'm still right because, as I've now checked, Nikola Jokic is still first in assists in the NBA. So I've got that. I think my take is still strong there.
Is that total or assists per game?
Assists per game. That's what everyone looks at.
Gotcha. Yeah, true.
I understand the point of total assists, but nobody really looks that stat up.
My one point that I would say, just closing up the Bucks for a second here on my end, is that, like I said, all while that they are a stellar offense right now, similar to the Pacers point you made on our last spot as well, like how the Pacers offense just seems really, really stout, and we want to see them keep it up to see if they're going to be a scary contender. We know the Bucks will keep up this offensive prowess as well as their normal defensive stoutness that they have. They're presumably the favorite in the Eastern Conference still, minus the fact that I did write that down prior to Harden's debut. So obviously I should make sure my notes are fully updated prior to recording a pod, but I still think it's them in Brooklyn, like you said. Yes. But the thing that scares me, I'm a believe it to see it kind of guy. I've made that very clear on my rankings of the East and the West on pod 1. It's hard. I know it's like, oh my gosh, you got to see it to believe it. Duh. Right. But until they make a Eastern Conference Finals with Giannis, I'm scared to say that they're my pick in the East or my pick for the finals. I have to see it to believe it first. I've got to see it at least once.
Okay, then who's your pick to win the Eastern Conference Finals in the East? You can't just stop there.
I know. Man, like I really still want to say Milwaukee even after this. And I know that sounds crazy when I say that by the end of this, as barring injuries and COVID protocol stuff, there will be a team assembled of Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and insert role player here and here. There will be a team that looks like that plays the Bucks at some point, whether it's the semifinals or the East Finals. I still, and I've been wrong now 2 years in a row, I still think Giannis can get it done. I think this is the best team to get it done. They have to be healthy come, similar to how Chris Paul falls apart, in the second, third round because he's been burnt out. The rotation that Coach Budenholzer puts in with Giannis, where they basically no one plays more than 30 minutes a game, 35 minutes a game throughout the regular season. And the fact that he's won MVP twice just shows you how stellar his numbers really are. But he's got to be healthy, and they've got to be able to just defend a team like the Nets, obviously. I still think I'm going to roll with the Bucks for now. I've rolled with them for getting the season. I'll roll with them until I'm wrong. I may very well be.
Yeah, I'd like to see the Bucks win the Eastern Conference, which has more to do with that I have a soft side for small market teams in the NBA than it does anything else. If I'm thinking with my head, teams with the amount of star power that Brooklyn now has and ability, like this is so it was a huge deal when Chris Bosh and LeBron James signed with the Miami Heat and created just one of the greatest super teams we've ever seen. It was almost a bigger deal when Kevin Durant went to Golden State to be with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. I think that this Brooklyn team may have more talent than any of those teams that formed at any point before. They're that good. They're the almost unstoppable dynasty kind of good if they can put it together. And so if I'm thinking with my head, I have to think, regardless of how the regular season standings turn out, that Brooklyn is going to be hard to stop on their way to the NBA Finals. Because as I also mentioned, those other teams, when those super teams were together, they didn't win the finals every year, but they won their conference every time. And they always got there. So I think that it's going to be hard to stop Brooklyn if they have all three of those guys there at the same time. Now, for whatever reasons, be it injuries or anything else that could happen, issues with COVID-19 that all three aren't there in key situations, then things change, obviously.
Yeah, you make a great point. The first year that LeBron, Bosh, and Wade were together, they didn't win the finals. That was their first full year together. And obviously they got there, which I think maybe the history repeats itself kind of moment here with the Nets. And this is the best three, whether we're not going to debate players who are better than, we may do that eventually, but I think just those three together, regardless of the LeBron factor, those three together are better than the three for Miami, like you mentioned. They made it their first year, but didn't win it. And I think that chemistry, they even have less time. Those guys were all friends prior. Some of these guys are friends, don't get me wrong, but it's that chemistry on the court they're going to have to build. And obviously this is such a weird year with everything going on. So there may be something that affects it. I really hope not. You know my take on just I hope. Like you said this prior to, I believe as well. We just want to see guys out there. We don't want anything to get in the way of that. We want to see. We hate hypotheticals with your friends where you're trying to debate what team is better and what this is better, who players. You don't want to be able to do that. You want to have no circumstance that can mess that up. So I think this season, we've said it since the beginning. This is going to be an awesome playoffs, both sides of the league, either way.
So now time to kind of lead into our third point. One of the big topics we talked about in our most recent podcast was issues that the NBA was facing with COVID-19, how things were starting over that last week to kind of get worse. A lot of players were having to sit out. We were having games canceled. There was the whole debacle with the Philadelphia 76ers only having 7 players and still playing the game. Recently after that, the NBA Board of Governors had a meeting and they came out with new health and safety protocols to continue to go forward with this year's season.
I'm going to run through those really fast and then we can discuss them. Honestly, it's unfortunate timing when we sit down to record episode 3 and then an hour later they announce a Board of Governors meeting. I wanted to pull my hair out, but just a couple of things that were really key. Some of the stuff I will say just to you and to the listeners as well, some of this stuff was revisements of what already was thought of, but some of this is now based on events, and I'll get to that in a moment. The first thing is no activities, and this is all per Woj, and Shams had a couple of things thrown there, but Woj was on top of this story the whole time, as always. Shout out to Woj. No activities allowed outside of team environment. Essentially, they aren't allowed to leave the team hotel, including they aren't allowed to go to an approved list of restaurants that used to. Whatever, guys are pretty much understanding now. The NFL is pretty good about it, where you get to your room, you bring your video games, you don't get out, you basically travel to the game, and that's it. Team meeting times are now limited. Team meeting times are now to be in the locker room of no more than 10 minutes, and all in attendance must wear a face mask. And then other meetings on a court or in a team-approved facility must be approved and socially distanced by the NBA. Limited away from work interactions is basically keep your personal people in your circle in and out of don't keep them in and out of the locker room, in and out of your circle. Just bare minimum who you got to have around you. You can't have your 25 person team. Each player can't do that. I know some of these guys have teams that are big enough to run a company. They can't be doing that right now. The personal actions got to be kept to a minimum, and they do have to test for COVID twice a week if they do bring those guys around, depending on how many. Team seating on planes. This one was already implemented, but team seating in facilities and planes should be distanced properly and wear face masks at all times for travel and for treatment. So when guys are getting wrapped up before the games and stuff. they're trying to make sure it's as safely as possible. This was the key point that I brought up about there's two different interactions that brought this up, that brought the last 2 points here. Is the mask on the bench, the Seth Curry incident, him playing some of that game, him being on the bench wearing a mask. Thank goodness he didn't really play most of the second, third, fourth quarter, but he's not wearing a mask at one point, but then he put it on the bench, and then he was tested positive in like the third, fourth quarter. So they had to pull him out and go. So that is now, you got to be in the locker room. If you're on the bench, coach, player, doesn't matter. You're wearing a mask, period. It's just I think that's going to be one of the biggest things. Cause if you're, especially with the Wizards as recording this, the Wizards are spreading it like wildfire in their locker room. They have 6 total active players, or 5 or 6 total active players healthy without COVID, and 7 of them tested positive. So that's going to help that, as well as the pre and post game interaction on my last point. And then I'll swing it to you for some thoughts. Bradley Beal and Jason Tatum were hugging it up and dapping it up as close as possible, which led to both of them being put into a 7-day, I think it was total of 10 now total, with Tatum protocol, where you can basically, there's no hugging before and after the games. It's fist bumps, elbows, and say hello and go. There's not really anything that they're allowed to do jersey swap wise, et cetera. I know that was a lot, but going off of what we know, a lot of that stuff, like I said, was improvements. A lot of that stuff was, or some of that stuff was, we learned from our mistake as a league that we all know and love. Based on what I talked about, as well as what we already know, what are your thoughts on these changes? And most importantly, do these help the NBA safely get to season's end?
So I think if people go along with following the protocols, which there are going to be points where mistakes are made and protocols aren't followed all the way at times, because guys make mistakes and that's going to happen. But if there's a conscious effort to really follow the protocols, to work to make sure there's not as much of that close interaction all the time, that guys are wearing masks on the bench, I think that it's going to be a good way to kind of start to stop the spread some and be able to get to season's end. Obviously, we're still going to have games canceled at varying points, probably throughout the season, until the vaccine is so widespread throughout the country that we don't have as many of those problems anymore. I think that this will help the NBA get to season's end, especially since, my initial question in the most recent podcast was a much more drastic suggestion of what to do for fixing the COVID issue. I had recommended or asked the question whether the NBA should take a 2-week break from the season schedule to get things under control. That is obviously not the course of action at the moment. I hope to see things getting better. I don't think that what's happening with Washington right now is a indication of the current protocols. These protocols have been in place for less than a week, and we know that the virus can remain dormant for a period of time. So I think that we'll see over the next several weeks whether or not these new protocols have had a positive impact on things. Hopefully they do. Like you said, we want to just see guys play. We don't want to see games as much where guys are having to sit out. Well, of course, if they're testing positive, sitting out is obviously the most important thing, because their health and safety is the number one thing of importance here. But hopefully that we'll start to see these guys getting healthy and getting back to playing the sport they love and being able to kind of get through a semi-normal NBA season.
One thing I thought of, I heard this on another podcast as well. It was a Ringer pod specifically, but I do think it resonates. I think it's very true. Adam Silver has always been, I made this point a few moments ago, he's always been a players commissioner, and he's really never had to he's never had to crack down. It's always been the NBA PA that's been really dominant in a lot of those major decisions, other than the unfortunate Donald Sterling blip. That's really his only real big thing he's had to really go through and worry about. But I do think this is probably going to be the first time where players commissioner aside, he's going to have to put his foot down. He's going to have to be real rash and make sure that the situations with like Kyrie Irving and then the Bradley Beal and Jason Tatum prior to the game and post game he's going to have to be kind of tough on these guys. And obviously they have a good relationship. Most of these guys do with Adam Silver. He's the exact opposite of what we had in David Stern. I think it's going to just be a point where he's going to have to put his foot down. I really do think this is going to be something that he's going to have to be tough on. This is his first real major situation he's had to deal with. And I think it'll be one of the many he'll have to deal with over the next however many years. I hope he's a lifer like Stern was. But one thing to say too, as well, on top of that Adam Silver point, would be, I almost said Adam Sandler, to be completely clear. These protocols they were very clear and said that these were 2 weeks minimum. I think judging by what you've said, I agree with you in every sense that these need to be permanent. I personally do, as well as I think most people would. Longer the better at this point, just to look towards season end. You also mentioned the vaccine. Just I don't have much to say on the COVID protocol stuff. As things start to change and develop, I'll be able to form a better opinion of it. Just they need to be as comfortable as possible. I've made that very clear, especially from my opinion of it doesn't change from last pod, but the vaccine is the hope as of this moment. I know a lot of owners listening to some Mark Cuban interviews that I have the last couple of days and weeks. He's been very clear about what the NBA owners feel is going to be the case moving forward, with the vaccine as the hope for to be able to go anywhere between 25 and 50% capacity for the playoffs. 50% is best case scenario. I don't see it being farther than that, and obviously preserving that next season and being able to. This is the whole point of this year, is to get us that 72 games, get the money for the owners and get the money for the teams, so we may not have to go into expansion like we talked about. But at the end of the day, these guys are hoping for the vaccine, owners wise are, and I think they're going to get it. And it's going to continue to get, like you said, more and more widespread and more at hand. But it really just comes down to just that if everyone does the right thing and we get to the end of this year, it's going to be a fun playoffs, like we mentioned. It's going to be awesome. It's just you got to get there safely. And I do foresee 25% capacity in most states, minus maybe New York, New Jersey, California, places like that, a little stricter. Seattle. Portland is what I was trying to say. States that are going to be a little more tough on those protocols. But any last thoughts on the COVID stuff, Josh?
Do you think it would be a smart idea for the NBA to look into, and obviously we're not completely sure what the world will look like come late April, early May, but to look into a bubble for the postseason this year? Because we've seen in the NCAA, while teams are traveling around for the college basketball season, they're going to have a bubble in Indianapolis for the NCAA men's basketball tournament. Is it something that the NBA should look at as well? They had a bubble last year, worked perfectly. Now, obviously, it wasn't the best situation all the time for guys to be down in the bubble for weeks at a time. But if you look at just for the postseason, it's only going to be a handful of those teams that are competing and making it far that are going to be there for a long period.
I'm going to be completely clear. I love the bubble. I supported the idea in July and June. I fully backed it. I was so excited. I was happy to have the league back. I thought it logistically made the most sense. And if, like I mentioned earlier today in the pod, I believe in the NBA and I believe in how they're going to do the right thing. And they have never proven me wrong in the sense that they're going to do the right thing to get it done. So people get their money and they're happy. We get the teams that we want to see out there healthy, and we get the best product possible. The finals, whether you love or hate either team, it was an awesome finals. It was an awesome run up to those finals. Yeah, the weird interaction with the fans and the screens and videos, and also the implementing the crowd noise. They got to get better about that. That's little things will work out, but it's still exciting. Obviously, as having a team in it and having a dog in the fight, I was really excited. But regardless, it was awesome to watch. Just sit down a couple of days each week and watch games. I support the bubble, but I don't. Knowing how the players made it very clear they didn't like the bubble. The players did not like the bubble whatsoever. And I think this might be a point, like I mentioned, about Silver putting his foot down. If it's going to be the safest thing to get the bubble done, obviously the Players Association has to vote on it as well. But I don't foresee a bubble. Let me be very clear. I don't foresee a bubble. Do I think a bubble needs to happen? Yes. I think it needs to happen because it's the safest thing to get it done. If they have to suck it up one more time, sorry, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. They have to suck it up one more time, do up another bubble, get it done. It's going to be less teams this time. You're not going to have a couple teams trying to play into the play, and it's going to be the play-in tournament. That's it. Play-in tournament and 8 through 1 at that point. Get it done. Let's make it to next season and let's be ready to have hopefully normal life. We're NBA aside, we both want normal life after this, so I think that can happen, and we'll see with the NBA moving forward. Last point here, or last segment, really, we're going to say I'm going to call it rapid fire. Just a rapid fire question we had for each one of us, just on the spot. We didn't even tell each other our question prior to this, so this is going to be quite literally our first thoughts and opinion of whatever this is. We've had a month of the season, and we've seen a lot. We've had a lot happen. It's been a really crazy ride so far. We're going to continue to keep people updated and keep our opinions out there as things change. My question for you, Josh, that my rapid fire, it took me a month to come up with this question, and I think I could have done better, I'll be honest. But not including perennial all-stars and not including anyone named LaMelo Ball.
What do you mean by perennial?
You'll see in a second.
Okay.
Not including just Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic type players, and anyone named LaMelo Ball. Who has been your most exciting player to watch / somebody you didn't see coming that you're just like, holy cow, this is really fun to watch, and I had no idea this was going to happen.
Okay, so I'm still going to be biased for a different reason. I'm not going to hit LaMelo Ball, but I'm going to go with Miles Bridges and the Charlotte Hornets because the guy's been dunking up a storm throughout the Hornets games. It really seems like every time the Hornets play, there's a highlight package of Miles Bridges, just an absolute dunk fest for Charlotte. And then there's the side of he's been a surprisingly efficient three-point shooter this year for a guy whose offensive strong suit is getting to the basket. He's been shooting the ball exceptionally well. And that's been the most exciting thing for me. Nobody could see the reaction that Trevor didn't like my answer.
Not that I didn't like it, but all the more I shouldn't have been surprised. I'm going to give you a hot take. I don't think he's been the best Bridges this year, but we can debate that.
Take.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. But no, I should have honestly, I should have came up with a different question because I knew that was going to probably come up. I was honestly, another thing in my back of my head was like, if he says Lou Dort, I'm turning the podcast off. Like Lou Dort is cool. Don't get me wrong. Shout out to Grayson, our friend, for being a diehard Thunder fan. And he's been loving Dort's production, but that kid's so young and he's going to be fun for them, but they're going to be awful. He's going to be 30 by the time they're good again with having 80 years of draft picks. But man, I don't know why I thought you'd say like a Lou Dort or something, but
I haven't mentioned the Hornets once this podcast.
I know we made it 36 minutes and you almost had me. You almost had me. All right. What do you got for me?
Okay. Very generic question almost. I want to know what your biggest surprise or positive about the NBA season and your biggest disappointment so far.
Holy putting me on the spot. I was not kidding. Let me just say my biggest surprise. Does it have to be player, team, anything like that? Just the sheer amount of shooting. Like, I'm not surprised. I knew the league was going that way, but my goodness, we've had the NBA 3-point record broken already. I mean, we've had guys. We've had. It's like been a barrage. Like it's almost college-esque in the sense that like I feel like I'm watching 30 Duke basketball teams like just shoot the 3-pointer, which as we're recording this, Duke and Carolina are both not ranked. Bad. No, we haven't covered college basketball yet, but I will say that's just interesting to bring up. I've been surprised by just the sheer amount of scoring and regardless of the COVID bad stuff and nobody playing and postponements and stuff, we've still had some exciting games. That's been my biggest surprise. I was really worried this season was going to look really bad. And I may listen to this or listeners may listen to this 2 months down the road and I may be completely wrong because we might make it to March and there might not be a season. I hope not. But I've been surprised by just how exciting the game's been. My disappointment, I guess my big disappointment would just be just this. We haven't had any major injuries per se, but just losing some guys that I was really excited to see. Nothing's really disappointed me in the long run. I'm trying not to have a boring answer, but losing guys like Markelle Fultz is not going to be fun. Yusuf Nurkic getting hurt with the wrist again after the Blazers were going to look really good. I'm blanking on one more injury that I just completely I'm missing, but there's been others. It's disappointing. You obviously never want to see that happen and you never want to speculate on what the team could have been, but just how the stuff's happened with the league, with the COVID protocols and the injuries. I want to see a good, happy and clean season. And I don't have anything outside of that. It's been fun. We want to thank you for listening. It's been an awesome, a fun one. Again, just from the bottom of my heart, I'll say this every time and no matter what, but we are appreciative of every single person listening and downloading and 5-starring on Apple and Spotify and everywhere you get your podcasts. We've got people on all kinds of podcast sites. It blows my mind how many there are out there. Shout out to Apple for getting them out there. But if you could do a 5-star when you get a chance, download. Weekly episodes coming out Wednesday. Emergency episodes coming out whenever the heck they come out. If something crazy like with Harden happens again, we appreciate everybody. Anything you got to say, Josh?
Thanks everyone for listening.
This has been the 2-Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor.
And I'm Josh. And we will see you soon.
Bye.